Hi, I'm attorney Gregory Dell, joined by attorney Rachel Alters, and we're going to discuss long-term disability insurance claims dealing with fibromyalgia. And Rachel, as you know, fibromyalgia is probably one of the most litigated types of long-term disability claims, probably due to the subjective nature of the condition. And most people who call us say, look, I've been diagnosed with fibromyalgia. Do you think that I can get approved for long-term disability? And that's probably what I would assume the majority of the calls are that you get, whether it's an application or someone that's been denied. So I want to go through in this video what type of evidence is going to be needed and what are the steps it's going to take to get approved for a long-term disability claim for fibromyalgia. So if you could start, Rachel, what's the first things that a person's going to have to do in order to get approved for a fibromyalgia long-term disability claim?
And like you said, Greg, the fibromyalgia diagnosis is a difficult one to make, and it's sometimes a very hard disability to get approved in the, with the insurance disability claims because of the subjective nature of it. So there really isn't a test where you can give blood or get a scan that's going to identify that you have fibromyalgia. Unfortunately, it's a diagnosis of exclusion. So what the physicians normally do is you tell them what's going on. They test you for everything under the sun, arthritis, lupus, MS, all these other things that can cause similar symptoms that you get from fibromyalgia, which is basically all over body pain, fatigue, brain fog called fibrofog. There's a lot of different things that fibromyalgia, different ways it can present itself. So the way it is diagnosed is with subjective complaints, and one of the other ways is trigger points. So there are 18 trigger points on the body, and if you have 11 out of 18 that are positive, oftentimes that's a way that a doctor or rheumatologist can diagnose fibromyalgia. So what I tell my clients is it's very important to go to the doctors, make sure they do the trigger point tests, make sure that they understand every symptom that you're having and that they've excluded every other possibility, such as lupus or other issues that could create the same symptoms. So once you have that documentation, then at least you have the diagnosis. The issue is with a lot of these insurance companies, just because you have been diagnosed with fibromyalgia doesn't mean you're disabled. So there's going to have to be a lot of documentation about your pain, how bad the pain is from a scale from 1 to 10, what other issues you're having, such as difficulty sitting for long periods of time, difficulty typing. If somebody has a lot of pain in their shoulders and their arms and their wrists and their hands, that's going to be very difficult for them to sit and do a desk job all day. If they have brain fog, that needs to be documented. And again, this is subjective complaints coming from the patient to the doctor, and it's very important that the physician write everything down. Otherwise, if it's not documented, it doesn't happen. So these are things that I tell my clients. It's very important to make sure that that you're communicating everything to the doctors and that the doctors are writing everything down. Because unfortunately with fibromyalgia, it is very subjective, and they have not come up with any objective tests that are definitive to diagnose this.
Rachel, talk for a minute about how is the disability insurance company going to challenge a fibromyalgia diagnosis and as a disabling claim?
A lot of times the insurance companies will say, well, you'll see in the denial letters, we don't really, we don't challenge or we don't object to the fact that the patient has been diagnosed with fibromyalgia, but we don't think that the diagnosis and the symptoms are severe enough to be disabling. And oftentimes they send the medical records to a peer review physician who is also a rheumatologist, who reviews the records and says, well, I don't think that this claimant is disabled. In fact, what they say oftentimes is their go-to is that a fibromyalgia diagnosis, oftentimes it is worse for the person not to work. They sit around too much and the fibromyalgia symptoms get worse. We recommend that they go to work, that they're active, that they move around a lot, they walk, they do exercise. We don't want them to be less than sedentary or even sedentary, because then the fibromyalgia symptoms can get worse. So they'll often say in a denial letter, yes, we may agree with the diagnosis, we think the symptoms are not that severe, and we think it would benefit the claimant to go back to work. So that's oftentimes what they use against them. So we have to make sure that the doctors are documenting the severity of the symptoms, what it does to the specific claimant, whether they have to take naps oftentimes during the day, lie down, whether they just can't focus because they're in so much pain, and then they get this brain fog, which we call fibro fog, which really makes it hard for them to do any kind of work or in an office if they have to multitask and be on the ball.
And then, Rachel, the other tool that the disability insurance company is commonly going to use is video surveillance. Can you explain why they do that with fibromyalgia claims specifically?
Sure, because oftentimes, and people with fibromyalgia, the typical presentation of symptoms is you'll have good days and you'll have bad days. It's not like you're going to have a bad day every day. So what happens is when a claimant has a bad day, they're often in bed all day, they can't do much, they can't do housework, they really are pretty much useless. But if they have 1 or 2 good days a week, they oftentimes will try and get out of the house and do so many things that they weren't able to do during the week because, in somebody's regular life, they need to go grocery shopping, they need to run errands, they may have kids they need to pick up from school. So on those days that they're having a good day, they will tend to do a lot of activity and be active. And then for maybe 2 or 3 days after those active days, they're shut down or they're in bed, they can't do anything. So if they're caught on surveillance on the days where they're active, the insurance carriers will use this against them and say, well, look at this. They say that they can't sit for long periods, they can't lift heavy things, they can't drive, they can't go out of the house, yet we caught them on this day doing all of those things. But what they don't see is that when they're back in the house for 2 or 3 days, useless. So this is what they tend to use against people, and I do warn my clients all the time, anything you tell the insurance carrier that you can't do, make sure you're actually not doing that out of the house. So if you're able to do things on maybe 1-2 days a week, you have to be upfront with the insurance carrier and say, if I have a good day 1 or 2 days a week, I can go grocery shopping for an hour. Otherwise, they use it against you and they will cut off your benefits.
So how do you advise your clients to avoid problems associated with the video surveillance?
There's really no way, the only way to completely avoid the problems per se with surveillance is to never leave your house, which is unrealistic. Insurance policies don't require you to be bedridden and housebound in order to be disabled. So what I tell my clients, it's really important when you're filling out your claim forms and they ask you those questions, what you're able to do and not able to do, that they don't exaggerate. So in your real life, they have to be honest and upfront about what they can do. So I think I mentioned earlier, if you can go to the store once a week or twice a week and do some light grocery shopping, that is something that needs to be upfront with the insurance carrier. They need to know about that so they can't use it against you later. Because believe me, if you tell them I can't do anything, I'm in bed all day, I can't leave the house, they're going to catch you leaving the house, they're going to use it against you, and then they're going to cut you off. So I try and make sure that we're actually also more general and not specific about things. So if you generalize more so on the claim forms than very specific, then it is also harder for them to use things against you. Because believe me, anything they could use against the claimant, they will.
And you mentioned earlier about how someone with fibromyalgia has good days and bad days, which is every rheumatologist will agree to that. In order to qualify for disability, do they have to be incapacitated or unable to work every single day, or the fact that they can't function reliably to show up to work 5 days a week, 8 hours a day as an employee, meet the burden that they would be disabled?
Well, what we usually argue is that, the latter. So if you have fibromyalgia and you are in pain, and obviously you're going to have good days and bad days, sure, you could probably work 1 or 2 days a week. However, most employers aren't going to allow a full-time employee to come in 1 to 2 days a week and then have, 3 to 4 down days a week where they can't do anything and they're home in bed. So that's just not realistic. So what we usually argue is that there's no way due to the restrictions and limitations that my client has from fibromyalgia, they can't work with any type of reasonable continuity, which means that they can't be reliable, show up, most 5 days a week. If I'm an employer, I don't want an employer, I will not allow an employee to take 3 to 4 days off of work a week because they're not feeling well. So that's the argument that we do make. Even though there are some good days, they still can't hold down a full-time job 40 hours a week and be reliable.
And then the last thing I want you to talk about, Rachel, because I know you advise a lot of your clients to keep a daily pain journal. Why do you recommend that, and how is it helpful in a claim?
Because, Greg, pain is subjective. So no one can really look at somebody and tell that they're in pain unless it's, they're in so much pain that they're sweating and their heart rate is elevated. But most people, the pain is, inside, and unless they express the pain, there's no way to really prove that they were in pain. So what I do advise my clients is to take down, keep a pain journal and write down all the days they're in pain, the level of their pain, how long the pain has lasted, so that when the insurance carriers are asking, well, we don't have proof of the fact that they were in pain 4 days this week, we can provide that to them and say, actually, we do have proof. Here is their pain journal. The pain journal documents the significance of the pain, how much pain they had, and how it affected them during the day. So if they had to lie down for 5 hours because they were in so much pain, that's in the journal. Now, what I tell my clients is to be very careful, because oftentimes that pain journal has been used against them when it wasn't actually written accurately, and then they were observed on surveillance during the same time they were saying they were in so much pain. So it has to be pretty accurate and make sure that they're writing it down during the time periods that they're in severe pain. They're not out at the grocery store. That's extremely important.
So, the theme of what you're saying is just be honest with everything that's going on, because we're talking about your ability as a claimant to work 40 hours a week reliably. That means showing up to your job from 9 to 5 or 8 to 6, whatever it may be, and being able to meet appointments, being able to meet phone calls, not having to go take a nap whenever you want, not having fibro fog where you can't focus, or not being able to meet with new clients or coworkers. So there's a whole variety of factors that go on every day, and it's not about how the disability company tries to portray it, where can you sit in a chair for 4 hours a day, which is what they try to do, is just make it into this physical aspect, and they totally ignore the cognitive aspects of the claim. And that's the biggest trouble, because when you have fibromyalgia, you get a lot of pain and discomfort, and with the pain and discomfort comes the cognitive difficulties, the difficulty processing, focusing, short-term memory, and feeling hazy. And basically, the last thing you want to do is be there trying to focus on work when you just can't even physically do it. So that's the typical pattern we see. In terms of presenting a claim or helping someone that's been denied, the first thing we recommend is that you reach out to Rachel or myself or any of our disability lawyers. We'd like to provide you with an immediate free phone consultation. In order to do that, we need a copy of your disability policy or a copy of your denial letter if you've been denied. We'll go ahead and set you for a phone call. We'll let you know immediately how we can help you. Our clients are located all over the country, so no matter where you live, we're available to assist you. The other thing that's really great is that on our website, we have a lot of information that's going to educate you about this claims process for fibromyalgia specifically. You can go on our website, search fibromyalgia. You're going to find hundreds of different case summaries that we've written about people that have been in your exact situation and how courts have looked at it. You're going to see resolved case summaries that we've written for clients that we've represented with fibromyalgia. And also, you should search your specific disability company, because, Rachel, as you know, every company has their own nuances as to how they handle the claim, especially with fibromyalgia. And by going through our website, you'll learn about your specific company, your occupation, reviews about your company, questions we've answered. We're trying to overwhelm you with information so that you get a knowledge and understanding about how to think like a disability insurance company. And if you're able to do that, you're going to be in a much better position to get your benefits approved. So we hope you find this video helpful, and should you need us in the future, we look forward to speaking with you.